Hi everyone. So I chose to do my presentation on play therapy. And so I covered the basics of play therapy. I also went into some of the different types of play therapy and its histories. But I also went in and covered how it works and how it helps children who have been abused. And I also went ahead and covered some of the benefits that come from that. So, to start off, I wanted to hit on the history of play therapy. So, in 1909, Sigmund Freud introduced play to his clients in order to uncover their unconscious fears and concerns. So, the very first person that he did it on was a 5-year-old boy named Hans. And this little boy actually had a horse phobia. But Freud was able to just set the stage for the next step in treating children. So in 1920, Hermione Hug Hellmuth incorporated play into her treatments with children. So she's commonly known as like the first to formally treat children through talk and play. So she pretty much would just observe them as they played and she'd sort of talk them through what they were doing. She'd almost like repeat back to them what they were doing as they played. And then in the early 1930s, Melanie Klein and Anna Freud created the theory and practice of psychoanalytic play therapy. So pretty much they just took a lot of information that those that had gone on before then and they kind of just put it all together and just created the whole concept of play therapy. So, play therapy can be defined as using a theoretical model to establish an interpersonal process wherein licensed mental health professionals use the therapeutic powers of play to help clients prevent or restore psychosocial difficulties and achieve optimal growth and development. So, something that I liked when I was researching more about play therapy is I found that it uses an approach to help children express themselves and helps them to resolve their own problems by kind of using like the children's language. And so the children's language is play. That's like how they learn, that's how they express themselves a lot of the time. And so therapists that specialize in play therapy, they harness that language and they're really able to get on the child's level, and this helps the child to feel safe and comfortable, and it kind of helps them to open up, and in a way, they're able to resolve their own problems with time. And then play therapy is typically used with children ages 3 to 11 because this is when they're commonly playing. After that, they kind of grow out of certain types of play. While I was reading in The Healing Power of Play book from Ileana Gill, I actually found some of these other quotes from other theorists and what they have to say about play. And so some of them said play is a mechanism for developing problem solving and competence skills. So that was from White in 1966. Piaget said play is a process that allows children to mentally digest experiences and situations. In 1963, Erikson said play is an emotional laboratory in which the child learns to cope with his or her environment. And then in 1961, Gianotte said play is a way that the child talks with toys as his words. And I think that was my favorite way to describe it, was because, just as he said, play is the way that a child talks because they're able to use the toys as their words. That really is a way that they're able to express themselves. I'm not a therapist, but I have been able to babysit a lot of children, and I'm able to see just how they do really express themselves through their toys, through their play, if it's imaginative, if it's creative, all the different ways that they play, they really are expressing themselves to us. And therapists are able to just notice that and really analyze it and observe it more. So some of the different goals of play therapy include helping the children work through their trauma by gaining new insight. Another goal is to enhance children's self-control, self-confidence, and self-efficacy. Another goal is to help the child develop respect and acceptance of themselves and others. A lot of times children are in play therapy because they misbehave or they act out. They don't know how to properly behave. And so this kind of helps them to not only respect themselves, but also their feelings and others around them and their feelings, and know that everyone is valid in the way that they act and the way that they feel things, the way that they feel their emotions. And then another goal is to help children remove the obstacles or trauma that may be hindering their development and growth. A lot of times they can't grow or move on past things because of past trauma. And so play therapy just helps them to realize that and kind of work past it. But it's also in a way that like they don't have to deal with the hurt of their emotions because it's in a safe environment that they kind of feel at home at. So here are some more goals. So it's to help children learn to experience and express their emotions, cultivate empathy and respect for others. So this kind of just teaches them to be more empathetic towards other children their own age, or maybe even towards adults. Whenever they may be sad, they can kind of just empathize and maybe go listen to them and kind of just help them out. This also, another goal is to gain more confidence in themselves and their new skills, their new social skills and relationship skills with their families. So a big goal of play therapy is to help these children to be able to become more independent and kind of have the skills within themselves to overcome these things and not have to always rely on someone else, but it kind of just builds that within themselves. And so whenever they have those new skills, it helps them gain the confidence needed to continue to act upon them and improve those skills. So we are moving right along into types of play therapy. So our textbook teaches us that there are typically 3 types of play therapy. I also am going to cover one from Ileana Gill, which we'll see here shortly. But so the types of play therapy are directive, non-directive, and there's also an integration of the two. So with directive therapy, directive therapy is just as it sounds. It's very direct. The therapist is in charge in this one. So typically the therapist will ask the child questions throughout their session and kind of just encourage the children to talk about certain topics. So if the therapist knows the trauma that they are dealing with, they'll kind of ask them questions about that in order to get them to talk about it and as a way to try and help them to overcome that and heal from it. So therapists will include themselves in activities and games that the child plays. So if the child is playing with dolls or whatever and they're acting something out, the therapist will kind of include themselves in it and talk to the child throughout the child's play. So they're always just there like every step of the way throughout the session. So results from this tend to come fairly quickly because it is very direct. And this is commonly used with survivors of sexual and physical abuse. Sometimes it's not as good as other types, and we'll go over why. But it's simply because the child isn't in control and they can't feel that they are able to kind of just freely express themselves because they're kind of just being directed in every little aspect. But that kind of leads us into the next type of play therapy. So the next type of play therapy is non-directive. And so this one is pretty much just the opposite of what the directive approach is. So instead of the therapist being in charge, um, the child is in charge and they kind of lead the whole thing. So it tends to be client centered, which allows the child to set the pace and lead the trauma related play. The therapist will typically observe the child and then evaluate the results of the activity or game that the child was playing. So with directive, the therapist would be more involved in the play. In this one, they kind of just are sitting back and watching as the child is playing. So while some children will be better able to express their feelings towards themselves and their environment or the trauma that they're experiencing by playing with toys on their own and being in charge, sometimes it's not as good for kids that are experiencing other aspects. For example, it may not be very beneficial to children that were sexually abused simply because they need an active approach to help them process the trauma and recover. So a more directive approach is better for children that have been abused, because a lot of times they may not even realize that they're in therapy if they're just playing and someone's just watching them. But if someone's asking them questions throughout it and encouraging them to talk about different topics, it's able to help these children that have been abused to kind of just work through their trauma. Non-directive approach is also very helpful when working through children that experience behavioral problems, because it kind of helps them to feel in charge and they're just able to work through that, and the therapist is able to observe and kind of just help them out. So the third approach is an integration of both non-directive and directive. So this kind of just captures the benefits of both directive and non-directive. I like the idea of mixing it because I feel like it's really good for the child to feel that they're in charge and in control, because then they really are able to set the pace for their own therapy. But I also find it very beneficial for a therapist to be able to ask them questions and kind of lead them towards certain topics. So I think that this is a great approach to play therapy. So this kind of just creates a balance of not avoiding the topic of trauma while not over focusing on it. So again, one issue with the non-directive approach was that some children didn't even realize that they were in therapy. So this one helps them to know that they are, but they're also still in control. So this encourages the integration of memories and the creation of both verbal and nonverbal trauma narratives. This supports the child with their emotional expression and regulation, and this allows the child to still feel comfortable and in charge, while also allowing the therapist to be direct enough to help the child work to overcome their trauma and their past emotions. I feel like this approach really is just the best of both worlds for both the therapist and for the child. All right, and now we are getting to Eliana Gill's trauma-focused play therapy. So she kind of has come up with her own approach. It's mentioned in the book, but I also was able to do a little bit more research on it online. So it starts by the child is able to choose toys to play with that are symbols of their trauma. Like they'll explain what each one is for, and just depends on what they are coming to therapy for, if it's trauma, if it's abuse, or if it's for behavior issues. So with this one, again, it's kind of the best of both worlds with directive and non-directive. It's just slightly different than the integration of both. So this one, the therapist is able to observe and document the play and kind of even talk more about in their observation which specific toys that the kids were playing with and what those toys stood for. But they're also able to provide a verbal narrative, so they're able to still talk to the kids while they're playing, kind of be involved, but not over-involved in the child's play. And they're also able to invite the child to verbalize and just talk while they're playing. Like they can explain, hey, yeah, I'm doing this. This person is this. This toy is this. I'm playing with this one because da-da-da-da-da. And so it kind of just gives them the chance to talk without the therapist over-directing their play, if that makes sense. However, a lot of times, children may be repetitive throughout their different sessions as they come in. They might continue to play with the same toys or do the same situation over and over while they're playing, reenact it. And so when the play is repetitive, the therapist will kind of just redirect them to create adaptive outcomes. And they also provide the child with a sense of mastery. And so this approach, the trauma-focused play therapy, it is Ileana Gills, and it was reviewed alongside 24 other child abuse treatments, and it received a rating that it is promising and acceptable. Of course, there still needs to be a lot more research done on it and case studies, but it sounds like it really is the best of both worlds. It is promising and acceptable. They've been able to have a lot of good outcomes from this specific approach to play therapy. All right, so now we are starting to get into more about how play therapy can help abused children. So this is working with abused children. So starting from the first session, therapists begin to assess not only the needs of the child, but also the impact of the abuse, whether it's physical, emotional, or sexual. They're able to see how it has impacted the child, how often they have been abused, that type of thing. They're also able to see the family's level of dysfunction due to the abuse that has been happening to this child. They're able to see how it has affected the family. They're also able to see the environmental stability, and they're also able to learn more about the child's relationship to the offender, because oftentimes we know children are abused by someone that is really close to them, or a close family friend, or even a family member. It tends to be a little bit more rare that it's someone that they've never met before. It could be an uncle or just someone fairly close to them, and so they kind of get an idea of that. And this is able to help the therapist to kind of just understand what the child is experiencing to what level of severity, and it also just kind of helps them to go about that. So this just kind of sets the tone for the following sessions that the child will be coming in for. And this just ensures that they have the proper materials and the environment is set up properly for this child. Also, this could help them to know which approach to better use. If they're able to gauge the child's personality and where they're at, they may want to gauge which type of approach should be used on that. But along the lines of materials, there are certain toys that we will go over later on in the presentation that they may want to use based off of how they have assessed the child starting from the first session. Oh, but again, as mentioned before, when working with abused children, they tend to benefit more from a more directive approach. It doesn't have to be all directive, but so that it kind of helps them to know what to talk about, because being abused is a hard thing for them to bring up. It's going to take a while for them to build that trust and to be able to feel comfortable enough to talk more about it. And that's why it's important that even in the first few sessions that the therapist kind of be a little bit more directive with them, and then you can kind of go back to like a balance of both. But you really want the child to feel safe in their environment, and that kind of is just very beneficial through play therapy, because right away they're using their own language, which is play. So here are some of the benefits from using play therapy with abused children. So play therapy provides these children with an environment in which they feel safe and can experience their feelings without limitations. So maybe if they're coming from an abusive home, or their parents don't really listen to them a lot, kind of just allows them to feel that they can just speak freely and they're not going to be told like quiet down or okay, la la la, like I'm not really listening. It kind of just allows them to be free and open with what they are feeling. So it kind of just helps them to thrive. This safe space allows them to ease their emotional trauma, so kind of puts them at peace a little bit. It can help build their self-confidence, their self-esteem, and ability to trust others. This is something that's really important, is that they're able to trust their therapist in order for them to open up and to be able to overcome their trauma and their past experiences. It also helps them to feel, as mentioned, their self-confidence. They're able to understand their worth and kind of know that the abuse isn't their fault. And yeah. So play allows them the distance they need from the pain caused by their experiences, while also enabling them to express those feelings and heal from them with the help of their therapist. So again, a lot of times talking about their abuse, it just brings up those memories and it's really hard for them to talk about it. But when they're able to do it through play and reenacting things or being creative with it, it's not as painful for them as if they were just flat out talking about it, if that makes sense. And again, as they're able to get more into an integrated approach, they're able to be more in control and kind of set the pace for how they want to talk about it and how much in each session. All right, so now we're moving on to the playroom. So the toys and the other materials that are in the playroom is really what allows the children to express themselves. And so there's a few guidelines. You want the toys to be durable because you're going to continuously use them throughout lots of different children and sessions. They shouldn't be too complex, so pretty simple. It should allow a variety of choice. So really you want the child to be able to go and choose the toys that they want to play with. You don't want to have to be like, these are the ones you get, because you really want them to feel in control. And so there are 3 different types of toys that are typically in playrooms, used in play therapy. And so the first is aggressive toys. And so those are like toy soldiers, dart guns, swords, scary masks, etc. So these toys kind of just allow these children to release their emotions that aren't typically allowed to be expressed in like another setting. So they can kind of just let out all their frustration by using these toys or whatever form of aggression they may be feeling. The second is real life toys. So some of these include money, costumes, toy cars, dolls, dishes, and stuffed animals. And so these toys are kind of just a direct representative of real world items that these children see every single day or may even use every single day. And then lastly, we have creative toys. So this can include sand, puppets, clay, scissors, markets, arts and craft supplies, etc. So it's sorry about that. So these toys just really allow the children to be creative. So some of them may do paintings, they may even like write stories. Depends on the age of the child and kind of their personality and what mediums they kind of like to play with. But something that I also learned is that it's important to put the toys back in the same spot that they were taken from, because this kind of just gives the children a sense of safety, and it also kind of gives them a sense of structure and familiarity. So they always know where their favorite toy is that they like to play with at play therapy, or kind of just gives them the same thing every day, and it's not too much of a mix-up for them. And so here I just put a couple images of some of the different play therapy toys. And so in aggression, you see there's like toy guns, there's a toy soldier. I didn't find a picture of a sword, but so these are just the type of toys, again, that they can kind of let out their emotions that they may not be able to show otherwise. For the real life, I found some dolls. There's a doctor set. There's some dishes. And again, these are just things that they would see in their everyday lives. And then creative, they have like a sand box. They have other small items. They have crayons and colored pencils and just arts and crafts supplies. Something also that is included is blocks. If they want to build things, they can do that as well. And so, in conclusion, play therapy allows children to express their emotions freely and work through their trauma. Play helps children to develop empathy, trust, self-esteem, confidence, etc. There are several different approaches to play therapy that offer various benefits depending on each child's needs and past trauma or experiences. And then here are my works cited. There are a few that I found via Google, and some of the other ones are just books that we have for this class. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching my presentation, and I hope we're able to learn a little bit more about play therapy and its foundations and how it can help children who have been abused and just a little bit more about it. But yeah, have a wonderful evening.